January 28th, 1980. The Wise Auditorium at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Some 55 years after its founding, with emotional speeches and a deep sense of Jewish historical import, the first Jewish university in the land of Israel and the largest watches as its students gather for a cultural event. The hall is packed to overflowing with more than 600 students who are on their feet singing the anthem. The auditorium fairly shakes as the loud, proud voices sing. In the name of freedom, we shall give our lives. Arab Palestine is the land of our struggle. We will accomplish the impossible. We have seen the path from the Negev to the Galilee. Our front will be triumphant. The anthem, no, not Hatikva, the anthem of Fatah, the guerrilla arm of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, today known as Palestinian Authority. The students of Hebrew University sit. On the stage, a pantomime is being performed. A soldier, an Israeli, is torturing Palestinians, quote unquote. Suddenly, three figures, faces covered by red keffiyehs, leap upon him. As he lies on the stage, prostrate, hands outstretched, the three heroes strangle and stab him to death. As the pantomime reaches a climax, the students of Hebrew University are on their feet, cheering and applauding wildly. The cultural evening ends with the moderator thanking the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine for its contribution of 10,000 Israeli shekels. The place is Hebrew U, and the students do indeed study there, most with generous scholarships. But they are Arabs, Israeli Arabs, and the vast majority are citizens of Israel. They are studying to be attorneys and physicians and engineers and professors, but mostly they are studying to be the future leaders of the PLO and the revolution. And of course, they owe their education to the generosity and liberality of the Jews of Israel and the world. On June 20th, 1976, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin stood before his colleagues, members of the Labor Party, and spoke concerning the problems and future of the Arabs of Israel. In his hands, he held the papers, statistics detailing the immense progress, quote unquote, made by the Arabs of Israel since 1948. Among the figures that Rabin threw out to prove his contention of Arab advancement were those that dealt with education. In 1948, only 32.5% of Israeli Arab children were attending schools. Now the figure was 92%, compared with 60% in Jordan, 40% in Egypt, Iraq, and Libya, 20% in Algeria, and 15% in Yemen. Whereas the number of Jewish students had risen sixfold since 1948, Since 1948, the number of Arabs now studying in state schools has jumped 12-fold. More than 1,500 were now studying in Israeli universities, and several hundred were studying outside the country. In 1948, there were more than 300 Arab teachers. In 1976, said Rabin, there were more than 5,000. Thanks to Israeli generosity, there were 241 kindergartens, 295 primary schools, 28 intermediate schools, and 80 high schools for Arab children. In Premier Rabin's self-satisfaction, one sees the bitter reality of Israeli self-delusion. Was Rabin seriously telling Jews that educational advancement would satisfy the Arabs and make them more sympathetic to the Jewish state? More to the point, did the Prime Minister of Israel not understand that it was precisely the educated Arabs of Israel who would become the most extreme and the most dangerous, the future leaders of the nationalistic revolution? Yeah. Did he not comprehend the tragic irony in the fact that the Israeli government and Jewish money were creating the Arab intellectual who would lead the revolt against Israel? The self-evident truth is that the figures that show the growth of Arab education are far greater cause for the Jewish mourning than joy. The Jerusalem Post in 1979 interviewed an Arab university graduate, a member of the PLO supporting Abna el-Balad group in the West Galilee village of Kabul. He is the perfect example of the product that Israel's, quote, head and stomach policymakers helped to produce. Rabin and Begin would surely point with pride to the young Israeli Arab, a graduate of Haifa's Ironi Aleph School, the only Jewish Arab high school in the land, like integrated, as well as of Haifa University's Department of Middle East History. Says this well-educated Israeli Arab, quote, a Palestinian state in the West Bank will not solve my problems. The PLO is the only body that fights for me. I do not feel this is my country. I don't care if I have one if I have more materially here than Arabs elsewhere, I am willing to be poor if it is my country. I don't know where a Palestinian state should be, but of course I hope it will include my village. Let it be noted that his village is in the Galil, northern part of Israel proper. On Israeli campuses, Jewish students wear T-shirts that read UCLA or Boston Celtics. But in May 1980, a group of Arab students took off their shirts to reveal their own brand of T-shirt, which read, "The PLO represents us." That is the fundamental belief of all the Israeli Arab students, and if there are Jews who are shocked, it is merely because of their own refusal to see. The Arab students and intellectuals are the representatives of a new generation of Israeli Arabs, one that rejects that very description. In a JTA article, Gil Sedan wrote, "Nor do they trouble to conceal their increasingly negative attitude towards the government of Israel, the country of which they are citizens." In the Arab village of Kfar Kana, just north of Nazareth, this reporter asked a young shopkeeper if he was a Muslim or a Christian. "We are all Arabs," was his reply. A perceptive article in Maariv was titled, "From Israeli Arabs to Palestinians." That is the nub of the issue. These people now consider themselves Palestinian Arabs who, through tragedy, happen to live in Israel. It is not a situation they are happy with, and many are trying to change it. The pity is that for years, the leaders of Israel, and of course the American Jewish establishment, pointed to Israeli Arab passivity and acquiescence as proof of their loyalty to and acceptance of the Jewish state. Either they were fools or preferred to act as such. The real reason for Israeli Arab passivity lay in the very natural results of the events of history. With the approval in 1947 by the UN of the partition plan creating separate Jewish and Arab states in Palestine, the Arabs, both within the land and without, prepared for what an Arab League official called a momentous massacre, which will be spoken of like the Mongolian massacres and crusades. With British troops leaving, the Arabs were confident that they would decimate the Jews and establish Arab rule over the entire country. But while Allah proposed, the God of the Jews disposed, and the outcome of the fighting was quite different. The Arab armies were thrown back, and not only did the state of Israel come into being, but an incredible panic swept the Arabs in the country, causing hundreds of thousands to flee. As the dust settled, entire formerly Arab villages and cities and regions stood empty of inhabitants and were now part of the new Jewish state. That which the Arabs could have had, were they prepared to accept the UN plan, was now lost to them. Instead of a tiny, grotesque Jewish state in 3 sections joined by 2 narrow checkpoints, and with an Arab population constituting 40% of its citizens, it was now a much larger and more stable Israel with only 150,000 shell-shocked Arabs as its citizens. But it was not only the quantitative loss that was so brutal. It was more than just the shock of being transformed from a majority to a minority. The few Arabs of Israel who were left were now people without leadership. The panicky mass exodus had seen the disappearance of the higher social classes. Listen to this. To quote a report by Uri Standel, issued by the Prime Minister's office, quote, "The wealthy Arab landlords and rich merchants, the religious dignitaries, lawyers, doctors, engineers, writers, and journalists were the first to take flight, depriving the population of all centers of initiative. The Arabs who were left were, for the most part, felahim, feudal peasants, ignorant and illiterate. The last thing in the world they wanted was a political struggle. Knowing what they have done to the Jews, what they would have done to the Jews, had the Arabs won the war, the rape of Jewish women and the severed sexual organs stuffed into murdered Jews' mouths were not isolated incidents in the riots of the 20s and 30s. I'm going to repeat this again. The rape of Jewish women and the severed sexual organs stuffed into murdered Jews' mouths were not isolated incidents in the riots of the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 1930s. They huddled fearfully, hoping just to live. They did that and more. From a group that faced unemployment in the cities and famine and no source of credit in the villages, they evolved, with the help of the Israeli government, into the comfortable and self-assured Israeli Arab community of today, nearly 700,000 strong. But this took time. This is 700,000 back then. But this took time, and for many years, the Arab of Israel assumed a low profile. He was ignorant. He wished only to make a living. Not that he loved the Jews or their state. Hardly. It was rather that he was traumatized by defeat, a simple person without leadership, living until 1966 under military rule that prevented him from freely moving about. Most importantly, he was part of the rural feudal family structure known as the Hamula, the tribes. Until recently, and it is a powerful factor in many villages, the Arab knew little individualism. Essentially rural, he belonged to a basic social village unit known as Achal or Dar, that can be best be explained as the extended family. This included the father, the mother, all unmarried daughters, and all the sons with their wives and children. They all lived in the same village, in adjacent houses, and sometimes under the same roof. Since the father owned the land that his children cultivated, he had complete control over them. They would hand over their earnings, and he supplied their wants. The second factor that went into the de-individualizing of the Israeli Arab was the fact that even beyond the immediate extended family, the Arab village was part of a structure based on kinship ties. Related families often lived in the same neighborhood and shared common economic and social problems. The heads of the Hamuls were its oldest members, their authority determined by their wealth and immediate family ties. These elderly Hamula heads held well-nigh dictatorial powers over the members of their clans. They determined who would receive land and who would progress up the socioeconomic ladder. And because in the first years of the state, these patriarchs ruled the lives of their people, there reigned an illusory acceptance of Israel by its Arab citizens. The truth is that the Jewish government understood from the first the venality and corruption of the old Hamula patriarchs. They were conservative, suspicious people interested only in their own welfare and position. For money and a promise of local power, they were prepared to give the Jews what they wanted: Knesset votes and submission. Sound familiar? Of course, the old men hated the Jews, but their guiding light was, what is good for me? They had little patience with and less understanding of national aspirations, and of course, any talk of social and economic reform was anathema to them. The Israeli authorities in those years followed a two-pronged policy: a military administration that severely restricted movement and an unauthorized political activity, and on the other hand, a close working relationship with the old men of the Hamulas, the sheikhs. Large amounts of money went into patriarchal pockets, and development funds were generously granted to deserving villages, quote unquote. The Labor Party ingeniously created two Arab parties, both faithful Hamula-led puppets, known as Progress and Development, and the List of Bedouins and Villagers. But all Israeli parties tried their hand at buying Arab votes through the venal old men. Thus, few found it odd that the Jewish National Religious Party was able to garner votes in Arab villages. Like Ben Gvir, you know? It was hardly ideology, but rather a clear indication of the real reason for the apparent Arab acceptance of and identification with the state of the Jews. It was not loyalty to Israel, but an Uncle Ahmed mentality typical of early stages of minority submission. Of course, it had to end. The fraud of Israeli Arab acceptance of Israel was built on the fact of the feudal structure of the Arab villages. But the days of that reactionary anachronism were numbered, and ironically, it was the Israeli government that having the most to gain from its perpetuation, destroyed it. There's nothing more menacing to entrenched conservative feudalists than social and economic change. But that is precisely what Israeli society and governmental policies brought about in the villages. The very Arab educational revolutions of which Israel boasts have destroyed the authority of the Hamula. Like nobody follows them anymore. Leaders, by creating an educated radical class that questions all the social, political, and economic axioms upon which the ruling patriarchs base their authority. It is not only that education opened up windows to the world and allowed the young Arab to see a vast spectrum of other social structures, it is not only that education exposed young Arabs to radical leftist revolutionary views that call for the overthrow of feudal privilege, it is deeper than that. Education, along with the fact that the young Arab was Israeli born and not a personal witness to the shattering trauma of defeat and fear of the Jews, led to a vicarious deep sense of shame and anger directed against the older generation of Arabs. The Arab who survived the 1948 debacle that permanently affected his thinking and drove him to collaborate with the Jews was now looked upon by his Israeli-born son as a traitor and bootlicking lackey. Born free, taking his citizenship and general rights for granted, educated and open to radical ideas, he looked with contempt on his own father for kowtowing to the Israelis. Thus, in February 1978, Israeli radio interviewer Edna Peer offered a live exchange between an Israeli Arab university student and his father. The son, a budding actor who told of having broken up with his Jewish girlfriend because she called Arafat a murderer, was bitter towards his father. The latter is quite a quiet Arab, the kind of whom Israelis are fond. His local village Histadrut, Israeli trade union chairman, he is typically trotted out by all the Israelis who refuse to see the Arab reality. He is presented as proof of Arab loyalty. The son, knowing this and knowing too that his father's father was killed in Akko during the 1948 war, bitterly asked the father, "Do you know what I would have done if the Jews had murdered you the way your father was killed?" The son, not the father, is the representative of today's Israeli Arab. Every Arab school which Rabin Begin and all the rest boast Israel has established will produce hundreds and thousands of such haters of Jews. The Hamula patriarch is an anachronism. The Israeli government saw him as a dam to stop the waters of Arab nationalism, but the dam has already burst. The Israelis might have gained 20 years had they attempted to preserve the Arab feudal structure. But since they chose to bring education and progress to the Arabs, they guaranteed the creation of an immediate generation of those dedicated to the active destruction of the Jewish state. Of course, education is only part of the total revolution that has taken place in the Israeli Arab community. The Israeli government, which at first really believed that a well-fed Arab is a quiet, happy Arab, and which was also determined to show the world how liberal it was, consciously set about to raise the Arab standard of living. Two 5-year plans designed to develop the villages succeeded in transforming the entire social, economic, and political structure of Arab life at a cost of more than $50 million. Today, Bennett gave them $50 billion. Electricity was brought to almost every village, along with water and sewerage. New roads, houses, and clinics went up. Agriculture was revolutionized as the irrigated areas were expanded, especially in the villages of Little Triangle along the Mekorot pipeline. New water sources were developed, old springs restored, and pipes laid to the individual villages. Long-term roads and easy terms for agriculture were made available, and as a result, mechanization developed rapidly. Tractors and combines replaced the old wooden plow and donkey, and promoted the transition from subsistence to market crops. Israelis taught Arab farmers the latest methods of farming, diversification of crops, and land conservation. The Arab standard of living skyrocketed. Easy credit and other government help saw a spectacular rise in new, spacious stone homes equipped with a modern sanitation, running water, gas cookers, refrigerators, and television sets. Close to 90% of all Arabs have electric lighting, and every village now is blessed with paved roads and easy access to the national highway system. Life was made better than Arabs had ever dreamed thanks to Jewish money and efforts, and the inevitable happened. The rapid economic change that joined the educational advances brought a social revolution. The difference between the young Arab and his parents is not measured in years but in centuries. The rural revolution sharply weakened the old feudal structure, as young Arabs were now able to apply for loans themselves and were no longer dependent on either fathers or hamulas. In addition, the sharp rise in living standards only brought forth rising expectations, whetting both the economic and political appetites, so that the young Israeli Arab stands like some modern-day Oliver Twist, facing his Jewish benefactor and demanding more. Israeli economic and educational advancement also led to a major social change. The rapid growth of the number of Arabs who daily leave their villages to work in Jewish towns and cities, as well as the steady growth of the urban Arab population, with all the radicalism that this implies. It is the town and city that produce unrest. Revolution, Marx, to the contrary, is not created by the rural numb and dumb. This is true even in advanced countries, and it is 100 times truer in the societies in which backward, conservative feudal members of rural areas are suddenly thrown into the open, liberal, modern world of the city. When the Arab was exclusively an agricultural worker, he remained in his village. Mornings he awoke in his village, during the day he worked in his village, and as the sun set, he slept in his village. His world was circumscribed by it, his thoughts and actions molded by it and its hamula heads. No agitator showed his head there for fear of losing it, and the ignorant Israeli Arab of 1948 had his wife or wives, his children, his sheep, his field, his religion. Those for him were all that he needed, and he fully expected that his son would follow his lifestyle exactly, just as he had followed his fathers, who had followed his fathers. But Israeli society could not be kept away. The growth of urban industry called for hands laborers. The pay offered was far better than what might have been earned in the village, and gradually, and then not so gradually, the Arab began to leave each morning to work in Tel Aviv or Hadera or Haifa or Netanya. Today, well over 50% of Israel's Arabs work in towns, in Jewish towns and cities. They see a different lifestyle, one that is quicker and more exciting. They see the stores and the clothing and the appliances. They see the women in short skirts and skimpy halters. The conflict between conservative and religious values and modern ones begins. The traditional value givers, the Hamula heads, are undermined. Moreover, as the opportunity for employment outside the villages grows, the power and authority of the father diminishes. This is true even when the son is not an intellectual but merely makes more money than his father thanks to a job in the Jewish city. How much more so for the high school graduate, for the university student, whose dismay at his father's backwardness is reinforced by contempt for the corruption of the Hamula heads and deep shame at the readiness of the old generation to sell the national heritage for the pottage of Israeli lentils. Today, under the impact of the Israeli-induced modernization, there's a steady trend from the villages to the towns and cities. Probably some 40% of Israel's Arabs are now urban dwellers. Of course, in the cities, the radicalization is even more rapid. In the cities, there is no closed society, no ever-present father, no stifling Hamula. In the cities, there are opportunities to meet Jewish girls, leftists, and intellectuals. In the cities, one can see the Jewish world that runs Israel, the land to which the Arab is supposed to be loyal. Israeli Arabs, fathers and sons, and increasingly daughters. For the Israelis have liberated the Arab woman too, in order that she may also vote for anti-Zionists and teach anti-Israel hatred. Thus, when the Prime Minister's office boasts that, quote, the expansion of the educational system has helped to raise the standard of education for younger generation of women, and the fact that Arab women are coming into closer contact with the Jewish population is opening up new horizons. One gropes for an explanation for the smug satisfaction. The most that can be said for Israel's liberal policy is that it has created a new generation of Jew haters with due care to ensure that the source of the hate is equal, without discrimination because of sex. To quote once again the young university graduate from the Western Galilee village of Kabul who heads the PLO group, Abna El-Balad, we have very good young people in our village. The father no longer rules here. Now each voter has his own ideas. We are trying to get rid of the Hamula lists. 90% of the young people voted for us in the local elections. My father wants to be left alone in peace and quiet. The generation of the fathers, the Uncle Ahmeds, is dying, destroyed by the Israeli government's head and stomach policy. The father is dead. Long live the son, the daughter, whom Israel created. They will do their best to destroy the Jewish state, and of course, the Jewish state will continue to produce them. The very first generation of Israeli Arab university graduates immediately produced the El Ard anti-Israel movement in the early 1960s. Indeed, even then there were those who saw and understood, and those who did, terrified by what they saw, put it out of mind. In Midstream magazine, December 1962, Nissim Rejwan, an Israeli writer, said, one of the more alarming aspects of the Israeli problem is that the new generation of Israeli Arabs generally shows even less willingness, not to speak of eagerness, to accept the fact of Israel's existence than do their fathers and grandfathers. The so-called Arab intelligentsia in Israel, which seems to embrace every literate person from university graduates to those who finished a few secondary classes, are in the majority of cases swayed by the heady talk about settling scores with Israel. Many of them, it would appear, cannot reconcile themselves to their status as a minority in the Jewish state and keep hoping for some sort of savior. Is anyone listening? In the past 10 to 15 years, a professional, academically trained stratum has risen among Israel's Arabs. The rise of the new Arab is a result of the bewildered and bewildering policy of an Israel that hopes to win Arab love through education, social, and economic advancement. What is the real result of the millions of dollars poured into higher Arab education and hundreds of millions spent on secondary high school training? Consider, in December 1979, the Progressive National Movement won the election for control of the Arab Student Committee at Hebrew U. In its platform, the PNM called for acceptance of the Palestinian Covenant, which calls for the elimination of Israel, the creation of a democratic, secular Palestine in place of Israel. Good luck. Acceptance of terrorist activities as part of the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. And indeed, in 1979, students and visitors at the university were startled to find mimeographed copies of the Palestinian National Charter being distributed. Among other things in the charter were Articles 19 and 20, which read, "The partition of Palestine in 47 and the establishment of the State of Israel are entirely illegal. Claims of historical or religious ties of Jews with Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history. The strenuous efforts of the leaders of the State of Israel have produced a generation of Arab leaders and intellectuals who are a source of everlasting irony. They are the products of the Jewish state that they wish to dismantle in favor of an Arab one. And should one have any doubt, the immensely frank interview with Mahmoud Mukhareb should dispel all of them. Mukhareb, an Israeli Arab citizen of Lod, and at the time chairman of the Arab Student Committee at Hebrew U, presented his views to Maariv, Israel's largest newspaper, in January 1978. We, the Arab students in the university, constitute an indivisible part of the Palestinian Arab nation, and we struggle in its service and in order to achieve its goals. As for me and my personal lot, I am the first and foremost a Palestinian, resident of Lod. My Israeli citizenship was forced upon me. I do not recognize it, and do not see myself as belonging to the state of Israel. The law requires me to carry an Israeli identity card and passport. As a Palestinian, I would prefer Palestinian ones. With the final solution common to the Arabs of Palestine and Judea, Lod will be in the sovereign boundaries of the democratic state. What will that state be called? Palestine, naturally. We do not recognize the right which you call historic of the Jewish people in this land. This is our fundamental principle. In this land, only the Palestinian Arab people have the historic right. Mukhareb is a member of the PNM, one of the two major forces among Arab students in Israel. It is instructive that the other force, the moderate one, so-called, is Raqqa, the Israeli Communist Party, which led the bloody Land Day riots against the government in 1976. But there is no essential difference between the ultimate hope of any Arab student in Israel, Arab sovereignty in every part of Palestine that is freed from the conqueror. There is nothing new or startling about this. The signs of Arab intellectual hatred of Israel and deep desire for its dismantlement were obvious to all who wished to see. The day the Egyptian army crossed the Suez Canal during the Yom Kippur War saw the surreptitious circulation of a flyer that read, "With blood and spirit we shall liberate the Galilee." On the terrible night of the massacre of more than 20 Jewish high school students by Arab terrorists in the Galilee town of Maalot in 1974, the nation mourned. But not all. The Arab students at Hebrew U held a noisy, joyous party in their Mount Scopus dormitories, built by funds from naive Western Jews who wanted to help the Jewish state. The next morning, a Jewish student who had lost her brother during the War of Attrition in 1970 complained bitterly to the dean of the students. An investigation has begun and evidence gathered, but no disciplinary action was taken. The administration explained to the Jewish students that its primary role was to lessen tensions and preserve the delicate relationship between Arab and Jewish students. This declaration brought forth predictable results. Does this sound familiar? Within 2 weeks, the Arab students were involved in yet another incident. Israel commemorates annually the terrible Holocaust that ripped away the lives of 6 million Jews. We just had this. Known as the Day of the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah, and the bravery, it was commemorated at Hebrew U by the lighting of memorial candles at the entrance of the dorms. That night, a band of Arab students smashed the glasses that held the candles. Even as an investigation was launched, the next week, Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, which is today, for the fallen soldiers of Israel, saw similar desecrations of candles in their memory. Angry protests led to a decision by a university committee to suspend the students, but the university administration, in a gesture of goodwill, accepted the appeal against the harshness of the verdict and allowed the students to return to the benches of Israeli intellect. Not for nothing did the Arab students see in this retreat further proof of Jewish weakness. It is pertinent to note that on Yom HaShoah, 1980, more memorial candles were desecrated. One Arab student, Suleiman Hasham, caught as he extinguished one of the lights, said, "There is enough light in the dormitories. We do not need candles." The pitiful weakness of the Hebrew U administration under President Avraham Harman inexorably led to the greater brazenness on the part of the Arab students. During the latter part of 1974, terrorist activity reached a peak, and university officials met with the student organization to set up regular guard duty in the exposed dorms. It was decided that all students who lived in the dorms, including Arabs, were to take a turn at guard duty. The Arab student organization immediately issued a statement that read, No Arab student will participate in any activity aimed at a brother Fedayun, freedom fighter, the Arab term for the PLO terrorist, even if this refusal involves self-sacrifice, if this must be the price of Palestinian revolution. At a press conference called by the Arab students on December 1st, 1975, three Arabs, Adel Mana'a, Riyad Amin, and Nabil Nachas, along with two of the apparently obligatory Jewish self-haters, appeared to explain their opposition. The Arabs called the requirement unjust because it involves a matter of conscience. The conscience, of course, was their feeling that the terrorists were fighting their battle and that it was a just one. Meanwhile, two Arab students, fearing that they would be expelled from the dormitories, did agree to guard duty. On the night of November 28th, an attempt was made to set fire to their room. On December 23rd, some 200 Arabs and their radical leftist Jewish friends from a group calling itself Campus gathered at the university to protest. The banner they carried read, "We are not ashamed to be Palestinians." The transformation from Israelis was becoming bolder. A mass petition signed by Jewish students demanded that the Arab students fulfill their obligations. At first, the university stood firm and agreed with the demand. Suddenly, however, it announced that it had recognized the crisis of conscience posed for the Arab student and agreed that those who could not normally agree to do guard duty would be excused. Morally. The victory led to similar demands for exemption in Haifa University, where at least one-third of the students are Arabs. One-third. In a struggle that saw threats on the life of Jewish student in charge of the guard duty roster, as well as two Arab students from the villages of Isfia and Deir Hana, charged with kidnapping and threatening the life of a Bedouin student who was prepared to guard, the Haifa University administration agreed to allow the Arabs to escape guard duty for a token monthly fee of 30 shekels. At the time, less than $5 American. The truth of the matter is that the Jewish demand to have pro-PLO students do guard duty was in itself grotesque. What emerged from this theater of the absurd was a Jewish university allowing pro-PLO Arabs to study and enjoy scholastic benefits. Jews demanded that the haters of Israel guard the Jews from their own Arab brethren. The combination of Israeli ghetto timidity and Arab brazenness, one fed the other, rapidly brought the campus for the first time to violence. In the winter of 1975, the city of Nazareth, hotbed of Arab nationalism, elected a communist mayor, Tawfiq Zayad. Zayad, a bitter hater of Zionism and the Jewish state, became the focal point of a new upsurge of Arab nationalism. In particular, he led the struggle against land expropriation, with full compensation, in the Galilee. That northern region of Israel, with an Arab population of more than 50%, posed a serious security threat to the Jewish state, and strenuous efforts were made to encourage Jewish settlement there. As mentioned earlier, the Arabs seized on the land issue to call for a general strike on Land Day, March 31st, 1976, and the resultant violence in which the Arab population of both the Galilee and the Little Triangle attacked police and soldiers with rockets and firebombs. 6 Arabs were killed. At Hebrew U, Arab students gathered on May 19, 1976 to commemorate the dead Arabs and to shout, "Down with the occupation," and "The Galilee is Arab." An opposing Jewish group waved the national flag and sang Hebrew songs. Suddenly, from the Arab side, heavy stones began to fly. Witnesses later testified that the Arabs had parked a Cortina automobile, license number 755982, nearby and removed sacks of stones which were thrown at the Jews. 4 Jewish students were injured. One, Elhanan Blumenthal, was injured seriously and required a head operation. The leader of the Jewish student body, Ariella Raldal, bitterly accused the university administration and President Harman of bowing to the Arabs. Raldal warned that the presence of 500 Arab students in the dorms would lead to bloodshed and that the riot was only the beginning. And the Israeli government responds to the clear threat from Arab educational advances? In January 1976, the Ministry of Education released the findings of a 14-member team of Jewish and Arab experts, quote, on education headed by leftist Matatyahu Peled, who later became one of the spokesmen for PIS Now, I call it, Peace Now. The team called for the reform of Arab education by basing it on the traditional and modern foundation of Arab culture, stressing the particularity of the national character of Arab literature and history. There is clearly nothing more calculated to instill in the young Arab a greater sense of difference and feeling of injustice done to him than this program. And of course, it would be done at Jewish expense. Nevertheless, the Israeli government refused to bite the bullet. In reply to Arab Knesset member Zaidan Atsheh's demand for an upgrading of the Arab schools, Education Ministry Director General Eliezer Shmueli announced on September 27, 1978, that he had taken schooling in the Arab sector under his personal care. The ministry, despite budget problems, announced that it would spend an extra 20 million shekels on Arab education. Earlier in June 1976, the first 24 Arab women graduates received their diplomas and licenses as Arab elementary school teachers from the David Yellin Hebrew Teachers College in Jerusalem. The program was sponsored and paid for by the Education Ministry, which was anything but lax in its diligent efforts to produce the educated and intellectual Arabs who would lead the struggle to do away with the David Yellin Hebrew Teachers College, the Israeli Education Ministry, and Israel. Thus, Prime Minister Begin's advisor on Arab affairs, the Ministry of Education, and the Jewish Agency announced in March 1978 that a new state finance fund had been set up to award 100 scholarships to outstanding Arab university students. Studies were being made, it was announced, to widen the scope of the fund to cover outstanding Israeli Arab high school students as well, if enough Jewish money could be found. The most powerful weapon the PLO has in Israel is the education provided by Jews with Jewish money for Israeli Arabs. The Jewish state trains teachers who increasingly either teach or turn a deaf ear to the strident Arab nationalism. And how could it be different? In 1937, the British Palestine Royal Commission report claimed that Arab teachers were turning government schools into seminaries of Arab nationalism. A former Arab education official in Palestine wrote, "An Arab teacher could not, even with a severe stretch of the imagination, have been expected to foster loyalty to a government that, in his opinion, was daily undermining the national existence of his people." The very same words could be and are said by Arab teachers serving under the Jewish government of Israel, and they actively and passively trained the new, educated, hostile, hating generation of the PLO. In December 1979, Maariv carried an expose of the growing open hostility toward the state manifested in Arab government schools. It quoted an official of the Education Ministry. Political subjects are raised in class and teachers utter slogans that deny the very existence of the state. These are commonplace occurrences. The superintendents whose job it is to check and prevent such incidents are themselves, in many cases, in sympathy with the statements.
Greg, what happened?
Just look myself up. I apologize.
What happened, man?
Yeah, I think the PLO kicked me out. Writes Maariv, at a meeting of superintendents 3 years ago, one said, "I'm a Palestinian Arab, and as such, I will educate the children." Among the incidents reported by Maariv, on a trip to Jericho by a school in Arabah, the teacher shouted at two Bedouins serving the Israeli army, "You should be ashamed of yourselves wearing those uniforms and serving the army as Jews rob you of your land." In Ramah, on Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, a teacher told his class, "Those Arabs who celebrate the Jewish Independence Day are traitors to their homeland." On Yom Ha'atzmaut again, 1977, as the Israeli flag was being raised, one teacher in Sakhnin, it's a town in the north, said, "This flag raising is in the honor of the day of the servitude and not of independence." The same day, in the village of Shab, 3 teachers refused to rise for the flag raising and asked others to do likewise. In general, the flag has become the symbolic target of Israeli Arab teachers and students alike. In Taipei, one teacher refuses to teach about the Israeli flag since the 2 blue stripes are symbols of the occupation and the desire to expand to the Nile and Euphrates. Funny. On June 18, 1978, students in Turan ripped the flag to pieces. The principal admitted there had been similar incidents in the past and apologized for not reporting them. According to Maariv, there have been cases of flag burning, the drawing of the PLO flag on blackboards, and hate-filled compositions. In none of these cases was there an adequate response by administration or faculty. In November 1978, Prime Minister Rabin visited Nazareth to speak to high school students. The Arab students asked him questions that in both content and tone shocked the country. Said Maariv in an editorial, "If anyone thought that the pro-PLO sentiment was limited to the other side of the Green Line, so to speak, the West Bank, yesterday's meetings between Prime Minister Rabin and Nazareth high school students should have brought him up short." In February 1978, 4 high school students from the village of Taipei were accused of attempting to set fire to 2 buses and of painting anti-Zionist slogans. When they were taken to the village to reenact the deeds, hundreds of students stoned the police and prevented them from finishing their mission. When the mayor, Abdul Hamid Abu Ataya, appeared in court with scores of students, he threatened a general strike unless the students were released. It is thus little wonder that in a survey of Arab high school students in June 1974, fully 84% stated they favored the establishment of a Palestinian state. Of the rest, almost all refused to venture an opinion. The high school students are the target of and greatly influenced by the Arab university students. And because most other careers are limited, university graduates gravitate towards teaching, where they convey their bitter anti-Israel feelings. High school students are invited to the campus. In one interesting development, after the openly anti-Israel rally at Hebrew U's Wise Auditorium, the Arabs asked for the hall again for February 10th, 1980, to meet with high school students. In light of the previous meeting, the school declined to grant the facility, but a spontaneous Arab demonstration persuaded them to change their minds, quote-unquote spontaneous. In March 1978, Arab students at Hebrew U invited high school youngsters from Taipei to spend the weekend at the, quote, Hadassah dormitories of the school. A wild party broke out with the students smashing sinks and toilets. Bitter Jewish students complained that it was not the first time. It was clear that these actions were more than exuberance, but a political expression of hate and contempt for the state. The rise of the new generation of educated Israeli Arabs who did not know the bitter taste of defeat, who openly moved towards confrontation with Zionism and the Jewishness of the state, was itself given enormous impetus by the Six-Day War. Again, ironically, it was a Jewish military victory that Jews turned into yet another political defeat. For the first time in 19 years, the Arabs of Israel were able to meet and talk with other Arabs who were not Israelis, who called themselves Palestinians, and openly spoke of the day when the hated Jews would leave. The Israeli Arab suddenly realized that he was neither meat nor milk, fish nor fowl. He was not an Israeli, but now he was struck by the awesome realization that he had not been a Palestinian all those years either. He was looked upon by the West Bank Palestinians as a traitor who cooperated with and accepted Israeli citizenship from the Jews who had stolen the land from his people. In one fell swoop, all the factors that went into creating the new radical Israeli Arab came together. Things would never be the same again. Not only were there new contacts with the West Bank Palestinians, but this was also the beginning of joint cooperation. Thus, Israeli Arabs participated in a Palestine Week held in 1978 at the universities of Bethlehem and Birzeit. They helped organize it, and they printed and distributed a leaflet calling for support of the PLO. In defiance of the loss, several Israeli Arab students have begun studying in schools in the liberated territories. Indeed, Hannah Nasir, the PLO backing former president of Birzeit College near Ramallah, who was deported by Israel in 1974 for incitement, told a Kuwaiti newspaper in January 1979, despite all Israeli efforts to prevent young Arabs from within the Green Line from both studying and teaching at the college, we have 3 lecturers there today from the region occupied in 1948, plus several students. One of the beautiful things is the renewal of ties between all members of the Palestinian people living in the land of Palestine, and this makes it easier to fight against the conquerors. This is quite true. The opening of the borders between the State of Israel and the liberated areas was seen by the incredibly obtuse Israelis as allowing the better-fed Israeli Arabs to demonstrate the benefits of the Israeli occupation. Of course, a child could have known that exactly the opposite would occur. The Israeli Arabs were suddenly given the opportunity to meet regularly with their own people who were struggling for what the Israeli Arab understood to be a common goal: freedom. The mayor of Hebron, Fad Kawasma, said in 1979, January, the Israeli Arabs have remained foreigners and their lot remains ours. There is no possibility of blurring the fact that they and we are part of the same people, and the fact that they live in Israel does not make them less Palestinian. In his newspaper interview, Birzeit President Nasir added, the destiny of the Arab College of Birzeit is to be the nucleus around which is built the Palestinian state. Indeed, the Arab students being trained in the Jewish universities of Israel see themselves in the same light. They are the seed of the future Palestine leaders in that area of Palestine conquered in 1948. They give leadership and examples to high school students, and they are the PLO leaders of tomorrow. The irony is that the most extraordinary rise in Arab brazenness has taken place under the supposedly tough Begin government. Maariv reporter Yosef Tzuriel commented on this as long ago as April 27, 1978. The rise of the Likud to power created a certain amount of tension in the first months among Arabs of Israel and the territories who expected a firmer policy against them. But after a short while, it became clear that the new government was as liberal as its predecessor, if not more so. The last 2 years have seen an inevitable rise in Arab student hostility toward the state. After winning the elections for leadership of the Arab students at Hebrew U, the PNM opened an office in the student dorms on Stern Street, hanging out an eye-catching sign, Progressive National Movement. How a group such as the PNM was allowed to run for office, where its members remain as students, rather than be prosecuted for sedition, would seem difficult to explain. Bear in mind, however, that this is a university that allowed an Arab student, Fares Saour, a member of a terrorist group that planted a bomb in the school cafeteria, to continue his studies after finishing his jail sentence. The school explained that the criteria for acceptance to the university were purely academic. In its publication, Tahadi for December 1978, the PNM wrote of its opposition to any settlement with a recognition of the Zionist entity in any part of Palestine. The student author called for a war, beginning with leaflets and demonstrations and concluding with armed military struggle. Above all, the PNM made this point crystal clear. The struggle is not limited to the occupied territories.
Greg,
Yes.
time out for a second. I'm asking how much longer this is. Only
It's a
because
couple more
I
pages.
don't know how much angrier I can possibly.
No, it's a couple
I
more
don't know.
pages.
Are you torturing me? Is that what
No,
you're trying?
no. It's a couple. I know. I'm not torturing you. I'm trying to show folks at home. This is just a couple more pages. I promise. Yeah. The student author. Okay. Okay. The PNM, running for control of the Arab student body, had distributed literature outlining its program and goals, in which they demanded that the right of national self-determination for the Palestinian people also includes the masses in Israel's Galilee and the Triangle. And so in January 1979, this is just 2 more pages, several Arab students distributed a pamphlet calling for support of the PLO and the disappearance of the Zionist entity. Moreover, some Arabs fired off a cable to the Damascus meeting of the Palestinian National Council to voice their support of the PLO struggle against the ever-present Zionist entity. A furor arose in Israel. More shock, more demands for expulsion of all PLO supporting students from the school. The universities did nothing, but tough General Avigdor Ben-Gal issued stay-at-home orders to 6 of the students. The orders kept them limited to their villages and were to be in effect for 3 months, enough time to make them heroes, and thus allow them to return and continue their incitement. The 6 came from 6 different Israeli villages: Tamra, Araba, Kfar Yasif, Mus, Sandala, and Al-Fahm. It is instructive to look at 2 of the students so that we may get a clear picture of the insanity of the Israeli policy, as reported by Yosef Walter in Maariv, 1979. Masoud Ajabria, 24, is completing his MA at Hebrew U in International Relations while going to law school. Besides Masoud, there's his brother Saeed, learning chemistry at the Mizrahi religious-sponsored Bar Ilan University. A sister studying at a teacher's seminary in Hadar Am, and 5 younger brothers and sisters are attending high school. Naturally, someday they will go on to a university. Yosef Walter visited the family and reported, from a brief conversation, you find that all of them think and speak like Masoud, the older brother. That is a starkly frightening sentence when one remembers that the editor of the Hebrew U student paper, Aryeh Bender, recalls a conversation he once had with Masoud Ajabria. Said the Arab, in order to achieve a Palestinian revolution, we must shed rivers of blood. Jamal Mahajana, 21, comes from Al-Fahm, it's in the north. His is a small Arab family with only 6 children, 4 of high school age, and one a teacher. Mahajana is a product of the integration Israeli myopics preach. He studied in the mostly Jewish Afula High School and says, I was not discriminated against. And so, having received the same education his Zionist neighbors received, and having been accepted into Hebrew U while 50,000 poor Sephardic Jews remain outside, Mahajana says of his telegram to the PLO in Damascus, we emphasize that we are Palestinian Arabs living in the state of Israel, and like others, we claim that the PLO is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. The Zionist regime is an oppressive regime. The total lack of any coherent and consistent policy on the part of Israel toward the Arabs was seen 2 weeks later, when the National Arab Student Union announced that it too saw the PLO as the executive leader of the Palestinian people. No one was arrested, no one was placed under house arrest, Little wonder that in the year that followed, Arab boldness increased. Arab students held an unauthorized demonstration at Hebrew U in November 1979 to protest the planned expulsion of Shechem's PLO mayor Bassam Shaka. When the school suspended the leaders of the demonstration, the Arab students announced a massive illegal protest. The rector, Israel Meshulam, a rather spineless academician, fearing a Jewish-Arab confrontation, pleaded with the Arabs to cancel the demonstration and promised to rescind the suspensions. The Arab protest was held, nevertheless, and as the students shouted, "We are all Arafat, and the state is all ours," a fight broke out involving chains, rocks, and knives. 3 Jewish students were injured. A Jewish student group was formed called Students Who Are Disgusted. At Haifa University on May 4th, 1980, 150 Arab students marched through school buildings, disrupting classes and shouting against Israeli fascism. 3 days later, a swastika and the words "Death to the Jews" were painted on doors at Haifa's Technion. At Haifa University, the Arab students published a paper called Bian, in which, among other things, they said, "We are an indivisible part of the Palestine Arab people, and the PLO is our sole legal representative. Zionism is a racist, colonialist movement. The young Arabs of Israel, the fathers are dying. The sons remain, and they will have sons and daughters, many. The young, educated, modern Arab, the golem of Israel, created by Jews who believed that by caring for his body and expanding his mind, they would lead the Arab to accept being a permanent minority in the Jewish state. If examples of Israeli blindness were not so prevalent, no one would believe them. But consider, in January 1979, Knesset Education Committee Chairman Ora Namir paid a well-publicized visit to the schools of al-Fahim, one of the centers of Israeli Arab hate. Passing a wall on which had been painted, long live Fatah, she told the Arabs that we are committed to doing everything we can to make Arab schools equal to Jewish schools, despite a government decision to freeze and cut spending for Jews. And then Mrs. Namir, a Knesset member and a leader in Israel, said, "The fact that you do not have enough latrines in the schools is for me even more tragic than not enough classrooms. You will have the budget, but you will have to promise me that the latrines will be first. Not by latrines does an Arab live, and he will never trade his national passions for them. The latrines we give him he will take, but the education he receives from Israel he will use to bring closer that day when the Jews will be a minority and he can generously offer them the latrines." The book, it's a chapter from a book that's written in 1981. And let's take a guess who wrote it.
Are you waiting for comments in the comment section or
I don't know.
or dramatic pause?
Let's see the comment section first, and then you can tell everybody who wrote the book.
Oh, I can do it. Well, it's Rabbi Meir Kahana.
Yes. And what's the name of the book?
I forgot.
They must go.
Yeah, like I feel like, that the people who were, the early political class of Israel, right? They couldn't have been. They weren't idiots. They
No.
were, and they installed a ticking time bomb in the nation because their goal was ultimately to destroy a Jewish country.
Yeah, because they saw what happened in '67, that we took back basically, Judea and Samaria, and they couldn't have that.
This sounds confusing for people listening right now. So when folks, the Jews who live in Israel, right, are not there. It has nothing to do with the Israeli political class. The Israeli political class had nothing to do with getting the Jews to come to Israel. That was happening for 300 years, and every year and every decade, it only increased exponentially. So the body of the Jewish people that are there right now have nothing to do at all with the Israeli political classes, okay? In fact, people who call themselves the Israeli government, they were involved in stopping the flow or regulating it and filtering it to make sure that it wasn't too many religious people coming in. And so the Israeli political class has always done either something to stop Jews from living in Israel or slow down the rate of Jews coming to Israel, or to make life in Israel intolerable and to install all sorts of ticking time bombs like the Israeli Arab like this identity, the Israeli Arab. Okay, just complete bullshit. Okay, if you're going to cite to me the 5 guys who you know are great guys, I'm sorry, that's not good enough.
It's like the people that say, "What about on the Israeli soccer team? Look at those guys; they're like such proud. They play proudly for Israel."
Soccer team.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I root for them. I don't know.
It's the same shit as the Eurovision. It's the same Israeli soccer team.
Well, they play in Europe, which is funny.
I know that's the thing. It's like having a soccer team. Oh yeah, we want to be like the rest of the freaking stupid Euro trash world. Okay, so man.
Actually, to their credit, we only have like 2 Arab guys on the team now. Only 2.
So that's not the only ticking time bomb that the Israeli political class has set to explode in Israel. It's just one of them. Again, the Israeli political class, they're dirty rat bastard communists. That's what they are. I mean, that's what they were from the beginning. And that's what they are. They kind of nourished or entertained the possibility that maybe we won't necessarily destroy Israel if it becomes some kind of communist utopia. But it didn't go in that direction at all. So we got to blow these, because they despise. You understand? The Israeli political class are not Jews.
Yeah.
Because they're communists. You can't be a communist and a Jew at the same time. Ultimately, you can't be a socialist and a Jew. You can't. Those things.
You can have a Jewish last name, but you can't follow Judaism.
Yeah, you
or anything of the sort.
Right. There's this idea that's all over the Torah. Okay, if a person does this, he is cut off from his nation. It's called karas. We say among the Ashkenazim, karat. Right.
Yep.
It's in the verses of the Hebrew Scripture. I'm not making this up. There's people who cut themselves off. They do things that are so odious to against the principles of the Torah that's what the Israeli political class is. I mean, that's who they are. That's what they do. Okay. So for those of you listening to this and you get confused, like, how can Israel do this to Israel? Because it's not Israel doing this to Israel.
No.
It's enemies of the Jews and Israel infiltrating the Jewish people, establishing themselves in positions of power in a government. Well, how come the Jews do this? How come they allow this? Because we're idiots. That's why. Because we're assholes.
Yeah.
Okay. But I mean, we're no better than you here in America or in Western Europe, but we're supposed to be dumb. That's the problem. We're supposed to be better. Okay. We're supposed to be like strong enough and smart enough to prevent these people from doing what they're doing. And and some of you might be thinking, well, what about Netanyahu? He's the best of them. What can I say?
Yeah.